I'm getting better at this. Podcasting, not feeling weird, talking to a camera and a microphone. It was cool. Me and Jordan just talked about the questions from the week. Some questions that we got in. Some questions were asked on the live stream, and it's got a cool feel. So watch it all, listen to it all, comment, subscribe, all the things. Okay, bye for now. Hello. Welcome back. This is where I have a discussion with Jordan on a podcast, which is called Discussions with Jordan. Before we jump into it, remember to follow and subscribe, and more importantly, comment. It's funny. It's a funny feeling to see the people watching and then not hearing from you, because it's like, hello? Is anyone there? But I'm guilty of it too, so I can understand. Okay, our guest today has won multiple Rockstar drinking competitions without even realizing it. He has a Call of Duty kill-death ratio of 0.08 and can be regularly seen in the comfiest shoes. Mr. Jordan Weaver. Clap. Yeah. All right, good.
I want you to answer something honestly.
Okay, go ahead.
Was I able to throw you off a little bit by walking in early?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay, good.
No, for a second I was like, am I supposed to stop? Or do I keep going?
Perfect.
So, for
That's all
sure.
I wanted. I just wanted to know that it tweaked you slightly.
Did I throw you off? Like,
You didn't slow down or anything. I was like,
yeah, well,
I know I was early.
I'm professional. What can I say? Hey.
Have you seen the video of the guy that talks about how he's in a singing competition and like he's at a church and he's going to sing a special and he's like, I blew his socks off. I was amazing. And he kept coming in at the wrong times and got mad at the guy playing the piano. That's kind of the vibe I was hoping for.
Yeah, it worked.
Great.
What are you doing today?
Same old. We are kind of at a place now where it almost feels like mechanical.
Right.
Week to week, things stay the same. This is probably the most on a routine that I've ever been. So, yeah, good.
That's cool. The topic today is questions from the week.
Questions from the week.
So it's not necessarily a topic about a specific thing. It's more
Correct.
like these are just questions that came in through the week.
I'm with you.
The first one.
Hold on.
Okay.
What if somebody were to ask, like, and I'm just thinking if I was watching, if somebody were to ask a question, like let me ask two parts. Would we ask an inappropriate question if we got one? Or does that get screened? Like if somebody asks like an inappropriate, like an anger or like crazy person question, we'd ask it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Good.
I mean, I think it runs through
within
me.
reason.
Yeah, it runs through me, meaning if it was like real bad.
What topic would you not ask?
Yeah, I'm not going there because that's the only thing that they would ask. No, I mean, there would be very few that I would be like, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I don't think there's a question you shouldn't,
I'm with you.
Talk about.
There's no stupid questions, just stupid people.
There he is. Questions from the week. You often talk about a spirit of generosity.
Okay.
What does it look like to have a spirit of generosity if you've been laid off from your job?
Well, okay. I remember one time, actually, your dad said one time, he said, if we are living for God in truth, then that means that we got a question. Jeremy, I'm going to come back to that. That we should think of living for God like a fountain. Mm-hmm. And what that fountain does, like if you've ever seen a fountain, we know that there's a source, there's water coming in, but it's always overflowing, constantly overflowing.
Right.
And it's more about understanding the connection to the source. And by being the spirit of generosity in my mind would say this: how do I know that I'm accurately leaning on the goodness and the sovereignty of God? Mm-hmm. It's a measurement. I can accurately say that I'm leaning into the sovereignty of God when I'm willing to work through the circumstances that tell me to stop. Because I think that instantly what you said, like somebody that's lost their job right now, instantly the knee jerk is to pull back from generosity. But what you're saying, and I'm not even talking money, because like if you have no money, what are you going to do? Like don't write the church a hot check.
Right.
Don't write your friends a hot check. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying consider that your source is a God that never runs out. There's that. You've heard that verse that says that you can't serve two masters. You'll either love one or hate the other.
Right. You
cannot serve both God and mammon. Mm-hmm. That word mammon, it's an idol. It's an idolatry of a God of never enough. That no matter how much you have, you still don't have enough. You can't. How many times I would love to be generous, I can't afford it. And that's everybody's excuse. I would love to be generous, I just can't afford to be generous. Well, What you're saying is I don't have enough, so therefore I can't.
Okay.
A spirit of generosity was what like our God described in the Bible as a God of more than enough. No matter what you have, it's always more than enough. And he teaches that, like when he's feeding people, like we're going to feed 5,000 men plus women and children because we don't have enough. And God goes, well, see, that's the point. If you're a fountain, if your source is the fountain of who God is, there's never a question if God runs out. If your generosity is based directly to your job, then that's an indicator that your job was your source. You said, if you don't have any money, you don't have any money. What are you going to do? You still show up. You're like, here's one. I feel like I struggle with being like emotionally generous. And what I mean by that is when I see that someone's kind of like trying to manipulate out a compliment for themselves, I just shut down. I have this tendency of like, I'm not playing along. I don't want to be manipulated. Whereas being like emotionally generous, I could be like, hey, yeah, that was awesome. Hey, great job. Like, I really appreciate it. Or not, and I'm not saying being kind. I'm just saying like playing along, even though obviously I know what's going on. So when I say generosity, what I mean is I'm not always looking at somebody as I need what you have, or I need. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody and you know they're networking?
Yeah.
Like they're not listening to what you're saying. They're good. Anyway, so what I was going to get at, you're like, that's the opposite of generosity because you're trying to add in.
Interesting.
By comparison, you have a conversation with someone who's genuinely listening. You feel it, like they really want to know you and who you are.
Right. That's
this overflow of God's presence that says, hey, I want to always try. I don't know if he watches these or not, but that's something that Joe Beers used to be so good at. Is you could have a conversation with him. How are you? Hey, where'd you get that hat? Where'd you get that shirt? And like sometimes it feels like a deflection, but Joe is so loved because he is just generous in that regard. I learned a lot. Actually, I learned a lot about pastoring from that guy because it wasn't a financial thing. He just made himself available to people in ways that I struggled. I struggle to make myself available to people sometimes. I'm going to look right at it.
Jeremy.
How do we know the difference between being a crazy conspiracy theorist? I can already tell you I'm not going to be the guy to answer this because I am questioning myself on this one. Crazy conspiracy theorist and being concerned. I'm just taking over and asking the question.
Do it. No, well, you can see it. It's right there.
Read the question for me. No,
okay.
I'm kidding.
Okay. It's right there.
Being a concerned American during these crazy times in our world and our country. Crazy person questioner. Jeremy. First of all, you've been back for a while. We still haven't seen each other. Not okay. Second of all, it depends on how much weight you put in human leadership. There's a time where, Alyssa, we're going to get to your question in a minute. I should not be seeing the screen. Because
I know. I was about to say, why is it there? We should have it over here.
I'm sorry. I'm running this now. No, I'm kidding. The children of Israel told God that we want a human leader. And God says, under human leadership, what you're going to have is selfishness, people that look out for their own interests, military power, people taking away your sons and your daughters and your crops. He just starts, if you look it up, he's describing taxes. They're going to tax you every chance they get. And every time you turn around, you're going to be paying more of a tax. God described that in the Old Testament. They said, you don't want leadership. God said, I wanted to be your king. And they're like, no. We want a human king. God goes, well, let me just warn you that you're going to elect a political power and it's going to be a nightmare.
Right.
And so, Jeremy, back to your question, I think there are times when people are looking to the political power to be something that it can't be because political power, governments are all based in law. That's what they have. They are law, 100%. And law cannot create love. Law is never the source of love. And what we're looking for is a leadership model that allows us to be better and be a community. And so to answer your question, I think realistically, if you know going into it that the political structure is always going to be somewhat of a letdown, then when they do crazy things, you're like, never. Sometimes people are like, oh, I have a conspiracy theory. I bet the government is, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, I guess I just kind of assumed they were.
Right.
I mean, they're people, right? I mean, what person that gets offered power is going to be like, no,
Right.
we really shouldn't.
I shouldn't. Yeah.
Which is, to me, that's the value of the founding fathers. Not that I don't really have like super strong political. I mean, you guys know me. I don't just bang the political drum a lot. But the founding fathers were coming out of oppression, and they said, even when we're gone, this is the structure that we think would be best to be free. That the government works for the people, not the people working for the government. And I think that's why they had experienced one and created the other. Everybody since then has only lived under one. Like they're living under the structure that we've been basically handed to sort of manage.
Yeah. George Washington directly denied power when he said he didn't want to become king because they wanted him king. Alyssa says, what is the point of praying for a desired outcome if God already knows what the outcome will be?
Here's my challenge, because I hear that and the logic of it makes sense. of like, and then you get into, is it predestination or is it free will? And there's
Sure.
there's a lot of philosophical directions you can go with that. I don't know anybody who has ever prayed, God, show me your will in this situation. Show me how to see it from your perspective, that has ever felt exactly the same way when they're done praying in a season of something. Ed Ditforth one time is a friend of mine. He's a pastor in Stephenville. And he said he's praying for his dad to be healed. So Alyssa, like, this is, God knows what Ed's going to ask. And he's praying, God, please heal my dad. Please heal my dad. Please heal my dad. And he said, he, as clear as he's ever heard God speak to him, he felt God say, I'm not going to heal your dad. This illness is ultimately going to be where it ends. So he is asking for something. God tells him no. And he said it was the richest season he'd ever had with his dad because he knew that was going to be the end.
Wow.
And so rather than saying like, God didn't give me what I asked for, he said, no, God changed my heart on that. Like, I go to God not for my desired outcome. Because if you think of prayer as trying to get God to your required outcome, then that's not a God that we would want.
Right.
I want a God that I can go to and I go, I think this is what I want. This is how I think I see this going. And the more I pray, the more I find my spirit aligning to his will. And then all of a sudden the outcome almost becomes secondary. Anytime there's a relational interaction between God and I, just the fact that God is there and he's present and that I know that he sees me,
right.
all of a sudden whatever I went to him praying about was like, oh.
Yeah. Can we just do a drive-in church?
You know, we've talked about it, actually. We're talking about it right now. We're kind of tinkering with what it's going to look like.
Sure.
We're not really sure. I think we've talked about like an FM transmitter in the parking lot, some screens. We'd have to do them on the porch just because they'd be hard to see. But yeah, I mean, Riley, to your question, yeah, I mean, it is reasonably, I mean, it's possible. Sure. We're not shut down. Like I said, we're not shut down because of some government restriction. I think honestly, the Constitution on that one's on our side. If that's the route we wanted to go, I think we're trying to build something that I've never seen another church build, which is the integration of an in-person and an online presence. We talked about this Monday night, or Wednesday.
Sure.
And so we're kind of not wanting to jump back in. Everybody's like, oh, when can we get back to normal? Never. I don't want to ever go back to normal. I think of the thousands of people that are like experiencing Jesus at an online platform. And we're like, oh, thank God we can get back to people in person. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's possible to do a drive-in church. That's part of the possibility for sure.
This was a question I had. Do you ever feel like you need to water down the Bible to have it received by the culture of America today?
I know this is going to seem weird, but in Africa, some of the villages and stuff, they were having trouble not too long ago because witchcraft was being practiced in the church. And you hear that and you're like, what? What? That's literally the opposite of the gospel, right? And because it's not part of our culture, I've never seen in person, I've never seen witchcraft ever. So the thought of it is like, nah. But the crazy part about that is that they say that a boat, have I said this recently? That a boat is okay if it's in the water. The trouble is when the water gets into the boat. That every time someone comes into a church, a person walks into a church, they bring in with them the culture. They track in the culture, so to speak, on their boots. And so whatever happens is like, because witchcraft is such a prevalent concept around that church, that's the culture that they're going to walk in, that they're going to track into the church. And so I see that and I'm like, that is so weird. How could anybody get so confused about the gospel that you would think witchcraft is going to be a part of it? We're going to do like hexes and curses and like, what on earth? That seems so opposite.
Right.
But then you start looking at how often Jesus talked about greed and you're like, oh.
Direct, yeah.
Oh, I see. So what that means is our culture tracks in our American concepts into the church. And like, imagine the idea of Jesus running into a church or a pastor whose leadership model is based on financial excess.
Right.
I don't mean enough. I'm not saying that. I don't care if a pastor has a nice house or whatever. I don't care. But when that's like the drum that they beat, like, God wants you to be rich. And you're like, that's as opposite to the gospel as witchcraft. It's just that we're so used to seeing it outside the church that when it finds its way into the church, it doesn't seem as backwards.
Right.
So for me, what I try to do, I try to water down the simplicity of it so that everybody understands it. That's, I mean, you try to preach at like a fourth grade level, which works out great for me. But the gospel, the principles of the gospel need to be so clear in the simplicity
Right.
that people can confront witchcraft in their own lives, so to speak. So when they go home on a Tuesday and they're, at work or doing the thing, like that the truth of the gospel is still alive. It's kind of like an ember that hasn't gone out. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, they're in a situation and the truth of what they've learned about the gospel from the word confronts something that's been maybe permissible in their life. And they go, wait a minute, they don't match up.
Yeah.
And so in the same way that I would tell a church, probably don't practice witchcraft in a church,
Right.
I would say make sure that our culture is not shaping the gospel.
Yeah.
I heard somebody say one time that if the gospel that you believe wouldn't work in a poverty-stricken third world country, then what you have is not the gospel. What you have is a cultural Bible concept, because the gospel is universal to humanity in every generation, in every year, in every region, in every people. And so I was like, every now and then, if I think I'm onto something, I'll kind of run it through that gauge of like, if I was someone that was living in 13th century Nepal, would this still be true about Jesus? Jesus wants you to be rich. You're not going to be rich. 13th century Nepal, there was no such thing as wealth in that region.
Right.
You are not going to be rich. So if your gospel is based on God wanting you to have financial wealth, then that means the gospel is relatively new.
Right.
And that whatever Jesus said is separate.
Right. So then, yeah, that's good. How can I? What?
Go ahead.
How can I have influence if I don't have fame or a platform?
Ask that again.
Well, so we talked about I think the podcast that we did together about the difference between actually having influence and having a number. Mm-hmm. And by definition, if you have a huge number, you're an influencer, but you don't have any influence. Versus a small number of a people that look for your opinion or your voice, then you actually have influence. Right. So then if you don't have anything, how can you be an influencer in day-to-day life?
Here's something that was so interesting to me about Jesus is that he could draw a crowd of 5,000. Mm-hmm. I mean, think of just the logistics they didn't have microphones. Like, think of all the logistical issues that would create. 5,000 people is more than their technology would have supported. So he had this huge platform. And there were times he would get on a boat, cross a lake, and go find one person.
Right.
So what that says is it can be either or. Mm-hmm. I'm not one of those guys that's like, if you've got a giant following, you must be preaching a real friendly gospel. I don't think so. I think sometimes people preach the word so well that people understand it and they're drawn into it. I think there are other times. James Sunday, when I was on staff in Houston, James Sunday couldn't read or write his name. And he showed up at the church. He was coming out of a drug addiction. He was coming into a clean living, him and his wife. And they came to my uncle's church. And this is one of the most impactful ministry stories. And most people wouldn't ever know who James Sunday was. But everything I ever accomplish from here forward is always going to be marked by James Sunday, because he shows up. He felt like God spoke to him. Couldn't read or write. Couldn't even write his name. As illiterate as you can be was James Sunday. And he felt like God spoke to him and said, I want you to go work at the church. So he goes to the church and he goes, I don't really understand this. He goes, but I feel like I need to go to work here. Have I told this story?
No.
He said, I'll do anything. I'll cut the grass, whatever. And they said, well, we're a young church. We don't have the budget. I'm sorry, we can't pay you. So he's walking home and he's walking down the road and he's really discouraged. He's like, man, I really thought God, spoke to me. And God said, I told you to go to work there. I didn't tell you to get a paycheck.
Yeah.
He's like, awesome. So to me, that's an insult. Like, to the average American dream, that's like an insult. Oh, you want me to work for free? No way. What kind of job is that? I'm not a slave. He turns around and goes back and he goes, I'm back. And they're like, well, obviously, what are you talking about? He goes, don't pay me. Don't pay me. I'm here at a calling. Well, what influence does James Sunday have? Arguably zero. But he stays there and he cut the grass and he made that his ministry, and he edged the grass and he cleaned up and he picked up the trash. And there would be days where God was really stretching me when I was there. I didn't know he was preparing me for a life in ministry. I was just trying to get through the job that day. Okay. And there were times where James would be out there mowing and he would stop his mower out in the middle of wherever he was mowing, get off his tractor, walk over and go, I need to pray for you. And listening to that guy pray, it was always directly in alignment with whatever it was I was struggling with.
Wow.
Now, I'm just one example, but whatever I go on to accomplish, I'll never forget that God was able to use James, who the world would say doesn't have like a big platform, to create a giant influence in my life. Mm-hmm. So there's a shared amount of influence. Yeah. Like, whatever I accomplish, he's got partial responsibility for.
I remember, I'm going to butcher it real bad, but my dad would always tell me this story. I think there's a book about it. about just planting seeds and what it can lead to. How one seed is planting here and here and here. And I think at the end of it, because of all of the seeds planted that you were able to track back, a person was able to genetically modify wheat and save like millions of lives in Africa, I think, wasn't it? I mean, that's
globally. Yeah. So let me ask you something. Garrett just taught me this last night. When's the best time to plant a tree?
Now.
20 years ago.
Okay.
You don't have 20 years.
Right.
So when's the second best time to plant a tree?
Now.
Today.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. And so I think if you go through and people like, everybody knows like, oh, I wish I'd have saved. I wish I would have invested. I wish I would have done this. I wish I'd have had a bigger platform. I wish. It does you no good. Sure. So your second best option is what can you do today?
Right.
Because what you can do today eventually leads to a 20-year investment down the road.
Yeah.
You eventually get a tree. You start with a seed.
Yeah. I mean, that's my favorite kind of influence personally.
Yeah.
What is the difference between tithes and offerings?
I wish I wasn't a pastor to answer this. Imagine just some guy off the street, if you would, because if what I'm about to say is true, try not to hear it from a pastor because you could disqualify. Oh, sure, you would say that. God's word teaches this, that I will put $10 in your hand, but one of those dollars is still mine. You're just holding on to it.
Okay.
So you're like, okay. So then when you give him his $1 back, how many times are we like,
yeah,
pretty generous?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how legalistic you want to get, but like that's technically by definition, that's not generous. Like if I said, hey, can you hold this $20? And I came back later and go, hey, you still got my $20? You're like, I'm feeling generous. I'm going to let you have that 20. You're like, no. Generosity would be if I said, hey, can you hold this $20? And I came back and you gave me 30, then I'm like, oh, dude, that's above and beyond. And I think the other part, when the Bible talks about the storehouse, it's specifically the church. And so that's something, this is where I'm like, this is be very hard to hear from a pastor. I realize I get it. And if that's hard, I get it, but listen to it from someone else. How often people are like, well, I pay my tithe. Like for instance, I did something nice for so-and-so. I'm like, hold on.
Right.
That's not tithing. Tithing is giving back to God, to his church. And if you go, well, I don't believe what our church is doing, find another church. I don't care, but I'm not going to change the rules or pretend that that's not what it says. But what happens is they do something nice for somebody. Well, then who gets the credit? Like if I saw you in a hard spot and like I were to go buy you a spare tire for your car and bring it back and put it on for you, you'd be like, that Jordan's a good dude.
Right.
And I'm like, paid my tithe. See, I get like legal credit for having paid tithe, and I get the social equity of like, I'm a good guy. See you down the road.
Sure.
And so by going through the church, what you allow that church to do for us, it's the 1017 project. That's our main flagship thing. Because of the generosity of people that are saying, yes, I'm coming back into the storehouse. I'm bringing my tithe back, but then I'm going above and beyond. And there are people that go above and beyond because they see what we're doing, and there is a generosity that's developing. Actually, generosity is one of those fruits of the Spirit that it's just like a result. It begins to just bubble up. It's not something that I don't think you really have as much control over it as you think. But what that allows the church to do is give food away, a lot of food, programs, things like that. So that when somebody goes, you know, let's fast forward right now. When's the best time to plant a tree? Let's fast forward 20 years from now. A young man is going through a life decision crisis thing that they do, but his church experience was Shiloh Ranch. And there was men, and they were engaged, and there was families, and like he's not going to be as turned off to the idea based on what we're building here as someone who was raised in an environment that felt very restrictive, very controlling, very angry. So the environment that we're creating here, based on the fact that God is pooling it in one area, gives us the opportunity to create and to build a culture that sometimes families can't build for themselves. You know, it gives us a greater impact for the kingdom. I would think that by knowing us, hopefully the goal would be that by knowing us, you're getting a clearer understanding of what it is that God does with people, and that it's a benefit, that you think of that as being positive.
How do you get friends to come to church? Friends that are too tired or too busy?
First of all, move to a third world country.
Yeah.
Go where people are personally familiar with their suffering. Those people who are like tangibly in experience with their suffering are always more willing to listen than someone who feels detached from suffering. Suffering in general. It was always the theory, the statement, I guess, is that it seems like God prefers the weak and the poor and the marginalized, like that almost God prefers them. But in reality, God gives the same invitation to everybody. It's just those are the people who see it first because they have less to lose. I mean, imagine you've got nothing going for you and you're in some corner of the world somewhere and you're dying from a disease that you don't even understand because you think it's the spirits or whatever, all these poor people, the things that they go through. And you were to say the God that you know exists, that you're aware of, that you can't put your finger on, here's his name. This is his name. And this is what he says about you.
Right.
I mean, so getting your friends to go to church, I think there's got to just be it says it's God's goodness that draws people to repentance. I think part of it, in my mind, because I have a friend, I won't say his name, I don't want him to feel embarrassed at all, but I have a friend who stays here all the time and doesn't come to church at all, ever.
Right.
We never have the talk. I'm not going to have the talk. I'm not going to have the you want to,
Right.
I just assume that someday life is going to bring him to a place where there's a curiosity that he doesn't have right now. And what I want to do is not burn any bridges between now and then with anybody so that when they start asking questions, they know that there's somewhere they can go.
Yeah. I mean, that ties back to the influence thing I know, going back to, very worldly thing, for an example, like an influencer.
My least favorite word of 2019.
Right. Who would recommend a product.
Yeah.
And I really liked that product, but I hated that dude. And then now I don't want the product. It's the same kind of thing where if they're like, hey, you should come to church, but you're like not a cool person.
Have you ever seen, I saw a bumper sticker that said, I have no problem with Jesus. I just don't trust anybody who works for him.
Right. Yeah. But if you're a calm, collected, peaceful guy who is just like, hey, if you want to, come with me, you can.
I know people who have a lot of influence.
Sure.
And the thing I like about it is they don't seem to feel like they're doing it for that the influence is like a byproduct of who they are.
Right.
That I'm into. I don't care if you've got 20 billion followers, whatever. If you are doing something that you're passionate about and the result is a following, great. What turns me off so fast is when someone is doing whatever it takes to get the following.
Right.
Be whoever they have to be to get the following. Like, I had to talk with my brother when we were teenagers one time, and I said, it's my opinion that a girl doesn't want to be, as a young men, listen up, a girl doesn't want to be your destination.
Right.
They want to jump in and go with you. Like, let's go. Where are we going? But when you see young guys that make the girl the destination, like life would be good if I could just date you, then they're like, ugh, I was kind of hoping for somebody who'd aim a little higher.
I see.
Right?
Right.
Same is true with influence. Like when influence becomes the target, you lose influence. Maybe you get followers, but you lose influence. Yeah. When you are passionate about accomplishing something in life, I think people kind of...
Isn't that interesting how you can tell?
You smell it. I don't know how to describe it better than that. You just smell it. You can't put your finger on it. It's like the subconscious, but you just smell it.
And it's interesting how I've seen in media, I've seen that reverse where they start out just seeking the influence, seeking the number, and it's just awful. But then they get burned out and they realize I can't do this.
Yeah.
And they actually come back to the feeling of I have to just do this for me.
That's just the plight of living, though. You go through seasons, and the only way that you know that it turns your stomach is having experienced it. Yeah. Like Miles Davis said, as a musician, it takes a long time to learn to sound like yourself.
Right.
I think I've mentioned this recently. I can't remember if it was on a podcast or just in a conversation, but when you watch the Johnny Cash movie, that was like the big reveal for Johnny Cash is somebody that the genius of that story was not Johnny Cash because he was trying to do it like everyone else. And somebody had the forethought to go, hey, what you're not seeing is that you are unique, but you got to sound like you.
Yeah.
And we have Johnny Cash as a result of a producer who saw exactly what you're talking about. That they went through the season of just kind of chasing the attention. I fly a lot, and for some reason, flying is kind of like a social status to young people, right? Like if you're 17 years old and you're in an airport, someone's got to find out because you're going somewhere because that's how important.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
And you just, there's just nothing worse than like a young person walking through the airport, like pointing the camera at themselves, like trying to. And I'm not even being critical, but I'm like, you're missing an actual experience. Like you're missing people watching. You're missing what is real. Like. And I get it. I was young. I was so stupid when I was young. I get it. But they're missing the experience because they're hoping to capture it for the sake of some other sort of social equity.
Well, I used to be, I saw media as an opportunity to travel. And that was almost the highlight of the trip, was getting to the destination.
Right.
And which is a cool concept to enjoy the process. But then I flew a couple times and I realized, man, this isn't as fun as I thought. Yeah, you just sit around. But
but young people are kind of always trying to find their voice in the world, find their place in the world, because they kind of hide. Generally, young people hide under their parents' shadows. And the thought is, someday I'll get my own story. I'll have my own story. I'll have my own life. Maybe it'll be this. Maybe this will get me there. Maybe that'll get me there. Maybe I hitch my wagon to this ability. When I was a little kid, I roped really, really good for a little kid.
right.
Well, it didn't take me long to figure out, like, hey, if I do this trick, then I get this amount of attention. And I think that's just part of learning to grow up. You try to sort of make a currency out of what you're good at. And then, like you said, as you age into it, you're kind of like, some of those sacrifices are just not worth it.
Yeah.
It's better just to learn to sound like yourself. And if there's going to be a big following with that, great. If not, yeah, I mean, prepare to be okay with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, that's everything.
Awesome.
I mean, I thought this one was good.
Yeah, I think they're our best one.
Yeah, and I mean, people actually ask questions.
Thank you, everyone.
That's
who asked
incredible.
questions. Do it again. We'll do it again next week.
Yeah, definitely like and subscribe and comment. So everything like that. Cool. See you guys later. That was good.